Well, good morning to everybody. Okay, how is everybody? Good. Well, we're excited to be part of this opening session, and it really is exciting for me to be co-presenting with my colleague and dear friend, Professor Dr. Carolivia Herron, who in 1997 wrote a book called Nappy Hair, and it was actually quite popular but also quite controversial. As a teacher of African American literature and children's literature, I taught this book, but it became more special to me when I was able to involve audiences here and there in the performance of this book. So this book is not like any other children's book, picture book that I've read, so I'm inviting a few of my new friends to participate in this performance. So are we okay right here, Bruce? Yeah? You can't hear me? Okay, well, what if I were here? Would you be able to hear me then? Okay, all right. Now, will you be able to hear my congregation? Okay, my congregation, we want to be forceful. Now, we don't want to like overdo it, but we want to do enough of it to sort of demonstrate that there are multiple types of literacies that I hope we address today. Are we ready? Okay. Now, I hope, and this is also part of literacy, that some of you will recognize a rhythm. And if you recognize the rhythm and you don't have the book, feel free to join in, both the old and young and in between, because it really is about rhythm and about rhythm keeping meaning. And I've done this a couple of times, but each audience is slightly different. So if you see that I'm not reading this exactly the way it is, what I'm hoping to do is maintain a certain rhythm, so that should not alter your response. All right? So let's try it. Okay.
I may be joining be a part of your audience. I'm
all right.
Part of the congregation today.
All right, but now my audience has to be really loud, because the more energized you are, the more energized I become. Okay? All right. So let's try this out. Nappy Hair by Carolivia Herron. Uncle Mordecai told this story at the backyard picnic. Uncle Mordecai told it. The folks joined in between the lines. Little Jimmy taped it, and here it is. Brenda, you sure do got some nappy hair on your head, don't you? Well. Okay, you know what? This is our practice time. I want you to come in just a little more, just a little quicker, okay? Not some pauses in between. I want you to be ready for it, and then we're gonna pick up the speed. Brenda, you sure do got some nappy hair on your head, don't you? Well. It's your hair, Brenda. Take the cake and come back and get the plate. It ain't easy to come by that kind of hair. You just can't blame Africa, it's willful. Them some willful intentional naps you got all over your head. But your hair intended to be nappy. I mean, combing your hair is like scrunching through the New Mexico desert in Brogans in the heat of summer. It's like crunching through snow, about a foot, 2 feet at least, with 2 inches of crust on the top. Y'all know how it sounds when you're scrunching through snow like that? Well, that's what her hair sounds like when she comb it out in the morning. Ashamed? I'm not ashamed, I'm proud. She's the only one in her school knows how to talk right. A rose among 1,000 thorns. The old hardheads think they can talk English, but this child talks the king's English. Talk the queen's English too. But she sure, Lord, got some nappy hair on her head. And I'm gonna tell y'all how she came up with all this nappy hair. Her hair was an act of God. An act of God that came straight through Africa. You see, the angels went up to God. Angels walk up to God to talk him out of it. Yet they say, Lord, Lord, Lord. Why you gotta be so mean? Why you gotta be so willful? Why you gotta be so ornery? Thinking about giving that nappy hair to that innocent little child. Sweet little girl like that, and you napping up her hair like you ain't got good sense. I mean, napping up her hair 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 complete circles per inch. I'm talking about 8 complete circles per inch of hair. And the angels tried to talk him out of it. But God wanted himself some nappy hair upon the face of the earth. So God, he turned himself around. He looked them angels square in the face. And God said, get out of my way. He said, this is my world. This is my world, and this child, this sweet little brown baby girl child, she's going to have the nappiest hair in the world. Ain't going to be nothing they can come up with that can straighten this child's hair. I'm talking about straightening combs. I'm talking about relaxers and processes. Ain't nothing going to straighten up the naps on this child's head. And it was done. So here she comes, sitting back in Africa making plans, squinching her eyes and looking deep, getting ready to come to America with them slaves. Sold your mama for a nickel and your daddy for a dime. I said they sold your mama for a buffalo. And your daddy, they sold him for one thin dime. But this nap come riding express, coming on across the ocean from Africa, wouldn't stop for nothing. Dance right on through all that old wimp hair. Wouldn't stop, wouldn't mix, wouldn't slow down for nobody. And every time they tried to mess with her hair, she stomped it and she kicked it and she snuck on around and came on through. Think she's playing football, basketball or something, dribbling on down the line. And when she was born, when we looked down on her in the cradle, we all shout and we jump back. We laugh and we shout because I tell you, she had the kinkiest, the nappiest, the fuzziest, the most screwed up, squeezed up, knotted up, tangled up, twisted, nappiest. I'm telling you, she had the nappiest hair you ever seen in your life. And the Lord in heaven, the Lord who brought the Israelites out of Egypt, he looked down on this cute little brown baby girl. He looked at her and he said, well done. He said, I got me one. One nap of her hair is the only perfect circle in nature. He said, I got me a cute little brown baby girl. I got me at long last this cute little brown baby girl. Oh, and she got the nappiest hair you ever seen in your life. All right.
The church folks are good over here.
Okay. All right. You start, and then we'll pick up.
Yes, we're gonna keep it going.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I enjoy doing that. Oh, every place is a different experience, and I love all the different experiences of sharing my nappy hair. Let me tell you a little bit of the story behind nappy hair. When I was born, a long, long time ago, once upon a time, I was born, and I had an uncle. His name was Uncle Richard. I changed his name to Mordecai in the book, but his name is Uncle Richard, and his job was he worked at the hospital in Washington, D.C., and his job, when anybody was born in the family, was to call up my grandmother and tell her what the baby looked like, give her some idea of some feature the baby had. And when I was born with the nappiest, kinkiest, fuzziest hair in the world, and he got on the telephone and told my grandmother, said, yep, we got it. We got the child, the little girl, with the nappiest hair in the whole world. And she said, I can't believe it. Is it really so? And he said, yes. And then the one line that's the longest one in the whole book, laugh and shout. Because I tell you, she had the kinkiest, the nappiest, the fuzziest, the most screwed up, squeezed up, knotted up, tangled up, nappiest, twisted up. I'm telling you, she had the nappiest hair you've ever seen in your life. That was the line that started the whole story. When the story began, that was the only part of the story. And he said that to my grandmother, and that became the core of a story that got written by lots of people over many decades, as it seems now. And so that was the beginning. I didn't write this story down until one summer. I was actually a professor at Harvard University. Many people think I wrote this for children. Believe it or not, I didn't write it for children. I wrote it for graduate students at Harvard University in epic poetry. That's who it was written for. I wrote it to tell them that African Americans have a call and response. Oh, hey, oh, oh, you say, oh, what? Oh, hey, oh, 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 hey, oh, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh. Okay, you hear that call and response? I think that's one of the most wonderful things ever created, and there's a way in which African Americans do it that I love so much, and that's why I wrote this, to show there was an oral poetry that African Americans had, similar to something that was done a long time ago in Greece and lots of other countries. Some of you have read Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey? Okay, that's what I was comparing it to. I was teaching Homer and Greek at Harvard, and this was a part of that. So everybody liked the story so much, so I said, well, why don't I publish it? We published the story. A lot of people liked it. There was a teacher in New York City, and this is the part I want you to hear because it relates to literacy. A teacher in New York City was teaching a class of Latino children and African American children, and they loved the book. Each child got one particular page, and they would make a little dance to go along with it, and they'd add some words. When the class began in September, none of the children could read or write in the third grade. After they looked at this book and started working with it, they all began to read and write and make more stories. And should we wait and let them all sit down, or what should we do? I'll just continue on. I see they're all waiting at the door.
Yeah, they can.
Just come on in. Yeah.
Come on in. Yeah.
Please come on in. Yes. I'm sorry to ruin your tape, but I don't like to see people at the door. Come on in. The water is fine. So anyway, guess what happened? The children learned how to read. They loved the story. And one child took her piece of paper home with her page. Her mother saw it, got mad, really mad, and went to the school and told the teacher, what business have you got talking about black people's hair in your school? You shouldn't be doing that. And the teacher said, well, why don't you read the book? They wouldn't read it. The parent who came in would not read it, came back to the school 3 days later with 50 people. They came into the school, they yelled and screamed at everybody. They talked to the principal and yelled at the principal. The principal called the teacher down to ask her what was the book about and everything. And instead of talking to her, guess what they did? They chased her out onto the street, right from the school. And to this day, and that happened back in 1998, to this day she's never been back into that school building. She was chased out of the school into the street. The people had called the ABC and CBS and NBC and CNN. They took pictures of her running out of the building. I was teaching in California at the time. I looked at the news that night just to see what the news was, and there was my book on the news. It was banned in New York. Nobody's allowed to read this book in the school system of New York City. And the chancellor of New York was saying that this was a banned book, and all kinds of things happened after that. Then a big controversy occurred, and I'm going to ask some questions. I want to see some hands. What do you think happens when your book is banned? What do you think happens? I saw a hand. That was the first hand I saw over there. That was you. Don't look around. That was you. Yes. Nobody reads the book when it's banned. Is that what happens? What do you think? What did she say?
They think it's a bad influence.
They think it's a bad influence. Yes, that's one of the things they think. And what do you think happened to my book then? What do you think happened? Yes, you. They went to the stores and took them out? No, they didn't. Has anybody heard of the First Amendment? What did they do? What do you think they did?
They what?
They wanted to read the book. Yes, that's the answer. So what do you think happened? Before it got banned, I had sold 13,000 books. right after it got banned, I sold 125,000 books, and I got on the bestseller list and retired. Yes. And you know who you should clap for?
Bad books.
You clap for the librarians. It's the librarians who don't pay any attention whatsoever when they say the books are banned. What do they think they do? They go out and buy another stack of them. And they stamp them into the libraries so that you can read them. And it's because it was banned. That's how I got to meet Professor Lester, because we met together to talk about my book being banned. And as I say, I became famous and retired from being a professor and went back home to Washington with my family. So, would you like to
add something?
Yeah, would you please?
Well, one of the things that Professor Herron said is that the students got so excited. They were third graders, and they got very excited because this was a very different kind of picture book. Typically, when we read picture books to small ones, or small ones read them themselves, it's single voiced. And rarely do we get the opportunity to have a kind of participatory call and response. So what I appreciate in this group here is that there's a certain kind of flexibility in your response. So on the one hand, this is about a certain kind of alphabet literacy, being able to read, but it's also about a certain kind of something we call cultural literacy. And that's being able to understand how rituals and performances take place in our cultures. So if anybody has grown up in some of the southern churches that I went to, then I heard a very familiar rhythm there. So nobody had to tell me, okay, it's now my time to come in, because when I go to church on Sunday, I heard what some call noise. But it was good noise, because it was a nice synergy, a nice sort of relationship between the preacher, who was always very performative. He was never one, and typically it was a he, although now there are more women pastors and preachers. He would never stand behind the podium and just sort of present. There would always be movement back and forth, around and jumping up and wearing a cape and costuming, and very much part of a performance. And in many ways, I think that's what becomes familiar to some of those students who read that initially. They heard the response, they recognized the rhythm, and the rhythm created meaning. The teacher didn't, though, tear out pages of the book she had. What she did was make copies of the pages. Now, this is important, too, when you talk about literacy and being able to understand that the teacher had all good intentions. When you take a copy of brown subjects, and I'll say a brown-skinned person, and you make a photocopy of that person who is pictured, what does it end up looking like? It's what? Well, it doesn't look like a book. It looks like a page. If you take the page, what does it look like? Let's compare this with this. What do you see? Yes. Well, it becomes very, very black and white, right? And in fact, if you were to Xerox a copy of Brenda here from the cover, Brenda would be probably as black as my pant leg is, right? Now, I've known a lot of black people in my life, and I don't know any black people who are quite this black, all right? But when the Xerox happened, then it somehow became blacker, and Brenda was no longer brown, but she was black. And so the parent was really upset when she pulled out this page of a Xerox copy. So that's really important to sort of know that it wasn't that the parent objected to the drawings here.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes, and it connected to a tradition that some people know as a minstrel tradition, M-I-N-S-T-R-E-L. And it was a tradition where some white people blackened their faces with something called burnt cork to be really, really black. And they danced around and pretended to be black, but they were pretending to be black in a kind of mocking way. That's something we call the minstrel tradition in the 1900s. And I think the combination of language that was not standard English, not somebody's standard English, plus the Xerox copies of the picture, and then the subject of nappy hair, and parents were all outraged. And they not only attacked the teacher, but they also attacked Professor Herron.
Yes.
So
many things happened. So many things happened as a result of that controversy. I went to New York City within 48 hours I was in New York City talking to all the people who had gotten upset about my book and were complaining about everything. And it was I was on CBS and NBC, I was on all the stations, and one of the things that got really bad, at one point, the Ku Klux Klan came in to support me. Can you imagine this? Now, I'm not only am I African American, I'm also Jewish. So here's the Ku Klux Klan supporting an African American Jewish person. And why in the world would they be doing this? They were trying to defend white womanhood. The teacher was a white woman. And so in the defense of white womanhood, they were calling me up and asking me what they should do to this school. And the poor principal, who was from Puerto Rico, was terrified. She had invited me to come back to the school and explain the book and everything, but once the Klan got in, you can imagine she was so frightened by it. And if you don't know what the Klan does, you should ask your teachers, perhaps, when you get back to your classrooms. But it's very terrifying if you're not what they think is the kind of person they want in this country. They don't really want a lot of people that look different, like most of us in this room. So that's one of the problems. So when I realized that the Klan was going to hurt people at the school, I actually backed off of the controversy and let it go, so that they could get relieved from this terrible thing that was happening to them, and all kinds of awful events that were happening. I would like to just share a couple of other things about my stories, if you don't mind, because even though this story is why you mostly hear, I have another story that connects more with Spanish tradition. So I just wanted to talk just a few minutes about it, if you don't mind. I found out when I was 9 years old, I went to visit my great-grandmother, Olivia. And she was living in Virginia, in Portsmouth, Virginia, and she was 103 years old. I was 9, she was 103. Can you imagine? And she had been alive during slavery times in Virginia, and she lived in a slave state. So I wanted to ask her, what was it like to be a slave? And weren't you happy? She was like 12 years old when slavery ended in the United States. So I wanted to know what happened. And when I went and asked her, what was it like to get free, and how happy were you that day? Well, first of all, you see, you probably can't see the picture on here. They have a nice little old lady here with a pink dress and nice little pearls around her neck, and she looked so sweet and nice. Well, my great-grandmother was not sweet and was not very nice. And the first thing she did, when I walked into the room, she wanted to scare me so I would leave. And she says, "Bah!" like that. When I walked in, it's like she wanted me to run out of there. I said, But I was of my first time seeing her, and I wanted to know so bad where my family came from and what happened before, that I stood there, even though I was shaking. All my cousins ran out the door, and they ran away. But I stood there and said, "Grandma, tell me what happened. What was slavery like? Weren't you glad the day you got free?" And then I was so shocked to find out that she had not been a slave. My family had not been a slave on my father's side. She said, "We weren't slaves here in Virginia or in the United States, but we were slaves 5,000 years ago in Egypt because we were descended from Jews." I didn't even know this. This was like a complete surprise. And then she told me the story that connects with my Spanish heritage, and that's why I'm bringing it up today, because it's El Dia de los Ninos. She said 500 years ago in Spain, there was a law that you couldn't be Jewish anymore. It's called the Spanish Inquisition. And the Jews and the Muslims were all kicked out of Spain on the same day back in 1492. Does anybody know something else happened that year? 1492? Nobody knows? Anything else that happened that year? Have you heard that year before? 1492. I know somebody that's scared to tell me. Is that it? In 1492, something happened.
Yes.
What is it? Columbus. Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus came to the Americas. We won't say he discovered it because there were people here already, right? There were people already here. But he did sail the ocean blue. Well, that same year, they kicked all the Muslims and all the Jews out of Spain. And my family was among them. They went from Spain to Portugal to Italy until finally one of my ancestors, the one you see on the front here that is pictured, was captured by Barbary pirates. We even have pirates in the story. Was captured by Barbary pirates, taken to North Africa, where she was rescued by the U.S. Marines. Maybe some of you have heard that story. What is it from? I always get it mixed up. From the halls of Montezuma, whatever, to the shores of Tripoli. Okay, well, my grandmother, my great-grandmother used to say, well, they had no business with Montezuma, but when they got to Tripoli, they saved my family and brought them to the United States. And this is where I tell the story of that heritage going from Spain to Portugal to Italy to Tripoli in Libya to the Georgia Sea Islands. And I hope you get a chance to look at it. We have some books over here that you may want to look at, you may want to buy. I'll be happy to sign them for you if you're interested in that. And I have more. I actually want to do more on the content of the book. Is that, unless you have something. One of my favorite things about Nappy Hair, not about my hair itself, but about the book Nappy Hair, is all the secret ways my Uncle Richard had of making the story continue. Because when you're telling a story, do you ever tell a story and you forget the ending of it? Does that ever happen to you? Can you tell everybody, can you tell people, okay, I want you all to stay here till tomorrow until I remember? You can't do that, can you? You got to either tell the story or forget it, because people had other stuff to do. Well, my uncle, when he was telling this story, came to a part where he forgot what he was doing. He forgot what to say. He didn't know what to put in next. But we were all sitting there at the picnic, we were eating hamburgers and potato salad and all that kind of stuff. And you can't stop the story right now. So he came to a part, and it's a page where the slaves show up. And let me just read that section. So I want you to see, I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to try to sing it. Maybe you can help me with the singing. And see if anybody knows what my uncle did to get over the gap. So here she come. Well, sitting back in Africa making plans, that's where it was. Squinching her eyes and looking deep. She was deep, getting ready to come over to America with them slaves. Didn't we come over here? Well, my uncle didn't have a clue what he was going to say next, so he made up the next part. Sold your mama for a nickel? Yes, Lord, they did it. And your daddy for a dime? Yep. I say they sold your mama for a buffalo. That's the way it was. And your daddy, they sold him for one thin dime. That's what they did. But this Nap come riding express, coming on across the ocean from Africa. Okay, now that section that starts out, sold your mama for a nickel, that didn't come from the story he remembered. He made that up out of some other tradition, some other cultural tradition that he had. And I'm going to try to sing it. I have the worst voice in the world, so if you want to laugh at my voice, you can do that, because I can't sing. Sold your mama for a nickel, and your daddy for a dime. Yeah, well. I say they sold your mama for a buffalo, and your daddy, they sold him for one thin dime. Yeah. Does anybody know? Thank you, but you're not supposed to clap, what's to laugh? Okay. Does anybody know what that is? That's a cultural tradition my uncle was using to tell the story. Do you know what it is? Beautiful. That's one of the she says she's using the word metaphor. That's exactly what's one of the things it's doing. That's one of the literary devices, and my goodness, I'm teaching that to my high school students, and they don't know that, so I am very impressed with that answer. I've been trying to teach metaphor and dig it into some people's heads all week. But this is something, I'm talking about something a little bit different. What kind of a song was that? Why did I sing it? Does anybody know what kind of a song that was? And we have to go, there's some hands over there. Anybody over there, what is it? What is it called? A spiritual. No, if you sang this kind of a song in a church, they throw you right out. This is called the devil's music. You know, this is not the good music. This is the bad music. What is it? What do you think? Savory. Slavery. Well, that's where it started. You're getting closer, but it's not the kind of song. Is there anybody? The blues. Yes, stand up. Stand up. Clap, give her a hand. Yes. That's why they call it the blues. That's the blues. And the blues is not the church music, but even though it reminds you of it because it's got the same African American beat behind it. But you can't sing this, and you couldn't sing it back in the old days. You couldn't sing it in the churches. I guess you can do it now because things have changed a bit. And my uncle, he was sitting there, and we were all waiting for the story to go on, and he wanted to eat his sandwich. And it's like, man, you lost your mind. You telling a story. You can't stop to eat. You gotta tell me the story. And he had to keep on going because the audience was pushing him, and he just went to a blues song and sung it in the middle. And if I can find it again, he stopped before he finished the last line. Like, sold your mama for a nickel and your daddy for a dime. Yeah. Well, I say they sold your mama for a buffalo, and your daddy, they sold him for 1 thin dime. Yeah. So can you imagine the next line, if he had finished it, he would say something, and by the time they got to you, honey child, oh, it was a stinking crime. You know, it would be something like that. That's what you would expect. But he didn't finish it. He went on to something else to make it change. And so by that time, he had figured out something to say and went on with the story. That's part of it. Now, since you had that wonderful response with this young lady right here, about metaphor, I'd like to ask you, the first time he says, sold your mama for a nickel, the second time he says, he sold your mama for a buffalo. Why does he use buffalo instead of nickel? Anybody can figure that one out? I see a hand. Because there's a buffalo on the nickel, and that's another use of a kind of metaphor. Very good. Thank you. Very good. Well, so usually at this point I open up to questions, but yeah. I'd like to know if you have some questions you'd like to ask me, and try not to ask a question I already answered, if you can. Lots of things have happened. I've been in places where they run me out of town. I've been in places where they love me. I've been on television shows. What would you like to know? Yes. That happens so often. As soon as they get scared, as soon as they get called on. Do you have a question? Should I wait for him? Oh, we've already finished that question. You have another question? Before I go, I see some hands over here. I'll take the gentleman underneath the camera. Yes, you. Can you speak? I can't. Can you repeat it for me?
Why were you on TV?
Why was I on TV? Because some people said that the book was no good. They threw it out of New York. You still can't teach this book in New York City, by the way. It's still banned in New York City. And they have me on television because nobody could decide what to do about this. Is it a good book? Is it a bad book? It was banned. And then they looked it up, and they saw it won like 4 awards, and they were teaching it in all the best schools in town. And so they had me on television to argue about whether it was good or bad. And the news mostly wanted to say that it was good, and something was wrong with the people at that school. They were mad at the school. So, your question?
She's asking your name again.
Carolivia is my name. Carolivia. My name is you notice that always in Olivia is a part of my story. Now I'll talk a little bit about my name. And my mother's middle name is Carol, but on my father's side, somebody is named Olivia going all the way back to Spain. That's the way we remember Spain. So my name, my middle name was Olivia. Then I stuck the two names together to make one name. So that's what happened. So somebody in every generation was told this story, and I was the Olivia for my generation. Okay? Thank you. I'm trying to look at the outskirts, because let me get the furthest hand. Yes, way over there. Can somebody repeat the question for me? I can't hear.
Can you stand up and say it as loudly as you can?
What's the lesson to learn? I don't learn lessons like that way. I actually don't think of it in those terms. I think, what I ask myself is, why is it people got mad at my book? There were lots of books. You need to talk to all the books that were written. Why did they get mad at mine? And I think the lesson I learned is, whatever you write, just keep on writing it. I don't think I learned a thing, or at least not something that's different from what I did. But why don't you talk about the history?
But I think part of it had to do with the American history and the fact that a white teacher read it. Because I had read this book to a number of youngsters, and it had not been controversial. In fact, I tried to publish a review that I had written on the book, and nobody was particularly interested until it was controversial. So I think in the same way that we have controversy over that other N-word, something people call the N-word. When black people say it, it creates one kind of drama, and when non-black people say it, it creates something else. And I think because a white teacher was reading this book that was about black people typically and their hair, and if she were somehow using what we call dialect, some people say this is bad English. I say it's another standard of English, because nobody actually, that I know of, goes home and talks the way some books are written, right? So we talk differently when we have different audiences. So I think it was a combination of that. She's absolutely right. No other book was as controversial in the same way, but I think it was a whole kind of mixture of how we still need to talk about difference in this country. And I think her book was just the catalyst for one kind of national conversation. Yes, there was another hand with the check. Yes. My sister congregation over here, yes.
So what influenced you to write this story?
Oh, okay.
What influenced me to write this story? Well, I was born with this nappy hair, and I remember there's so many different parts of the story that I love. I'll tell you the part about my father. I was born with this really, really nappy hair, and even in everybody around us was black and had sort of nappy hair, but nobody had hair like mine. Nobody's hair was quite as kinky, quite as screwed up, twisted up, napped up and all. And some people, even in the black community, would talk about you if your hair was too nappy. It would be like a bad thing. And this was not cool. But my father loved my hair, and loved me, of course, and he made it the business of his life that if anybody talked negative about my hair, anybody started saying, you got here this cute little girl, look at that hair. They were like the angels here. Angels, how could you give that nappy hair to that cute little girl like that? And my father would not let anybody come near me or near our house if they talked like that about hair. So I didn't know this. I just grew up thinking nappy hair was fine. I didn't know that this was controversial. People don't believe me sometimes. To me, it was like I was doing it just like it was done all my life. And the only time in my life I saw my father cry was the day I handed him this book. I handed him this book, and he got tears in his eyes. And what happened? I thought you would like the book. And he says, I do love it. He says, but I made it the business of my life that nobody would make you feel bad about your hair, and nobody would hurt your feelings about your hair. I wouldn't let them in the house. If they talked about it in the car, they couldn't come up to the door. And this proves to me that I was successful, he said, and that made him so happy. He would make up wonderful stories about why my hair was so nappy. One of my favorite was, I remember I came home from junior high school, and I learned about what the brain looks like. Maybe some of you have learned already, because they learn things younger and younger these days, about how all the little curly cues are in your brain. Do you know? Does anybody know about that? Have you seen the picture of the brain? It has little curly cues on it. Well, he said that I was so smart that the curly cues just kept on growing and growing and came up right through my skull and right up and into my hair. And that's why my hair was so nappy, because they said that the more curly cues you had, the more intelligent you were. So he made it, that was where my hair came from. And he made up wonderful stories. And the father-daughter connection is so important, I think, in the self-esteem of little girls.
And I'll add one other thing too, that not only was it the subject, but this was also written at a time when there was a lot of controversy about something we call now Ebonics. It was not an effort to teach black children how to speak, but it was rather acknowledging the legitimacy of language that many black children brought into the classroom. And as I said, it's not about, speaking like see, spot, run, hello, John, and enunciating all of the sounds. It was the way we speak with our friends. It's the way that we speak with our family. And sometimes we don't speak the same way when we're in the classroom than when we're in our circle of friends. And there are some words in here that you wouldn't find in the dictionary, like God wanted his self. Well, we know that that's not a word in the dictionary, but we certainly understand in different expressions, particularly different expressions that are not formal, this language becomes perfectly acceptable. So when you say, for example, honey child, I don't know anybody who goes around and says honey child, so that you're sort of what they call in radio puking, where every single sound is enunciated. The rhythm captures how words are pronounced, and I think that's what she captures, but this was all about the same time, and there were a number of black people, prominent black people, who were very, very against this idea of celebrating what we call the vernacular, the way people talk, the way people, Zora Neale Hurston had done it in the 1920s, and many others had done it, to say this is a celebration of a culture. It does not mean that Brenda can't speak English, but Brenda is around people who don't always speak English. When I go back home with my PhD in English, everybody in my family does not speak standard English, and I don't speak standard English when I go home because I'm not in class and I'm not teaching. So I think it's important to recognize when we're talking about literacy that we talk about multiple literacies, and storytelling is literacy, and being able to understand that language is a part of identity. It's not about how smart you are, it's how we communicate and how we recognize that different communication styles depend on different audiences and different purposes. And I think if there's one lesson that we need to get, it's that sense that how you speak is not necessarily connected with how smart you are, okay?
I just want to add one more thing to that, because my Uncle Richard, I don't know how many of you noticed it on my favorite page, shows little Brenda at the blackboard saying, and it says speeches today up front. Let me just remind you, ashamed, I'm not ashamed, I'm proud. She's the only one in her school knows how to talk right. Ain't she something? A rose among 1,000 thorns, I know it. Them old hardheads think they can talk English. Yep, but this child talked the King's English and talked the Queen's English too. Well, guess that I changed that from the original, what my uncle was saying. What had happened was, I had just been on television with several professors from Harvard. And he was so proud of me because my English was as standard and as beautiful and as perfect as my colleagues from Harvard. And what he actually said was, them old hardheads up at Harvard think they can speak. But this child, my niece, she speaks the King's English and speaks the Queen's English too. So it's actually a praise song for somebody who does speak standard English. It's just the opposite of what people were saying. He was praising me because somehow I had left the home where and the wider community at home where standard English was not the standard, gone out and in my uncle's view, met the enemy and done well. So it was a different kind of story in that way. I don't know where we are in terms of our time. Oh, okay.
You'll be around to answer more
Yes,
questions?
and I'm happy to sign any books you have if you're available. Thank you.